Let's get started with our demo, first covering how to start from the very beginning, register a domain name. We're going to take that domain name and we're going to hook it up to a static website. So the very first thing we need to do though, is we need to go to our console and we need to set up a development environment. So to do that, we'll go to Cloud9. If you haven't noticed, I do use Cloud9 quite a bit because it's my preferred environment to do development. It's the space station. So we'll call this Cloud Web Dev an environment for building websites. Great. Next step here, I'm going to pick a reasonably powerful machine. So I'm going to pick something that's got, let's say, about 16 gigs of RAM maybe, or 32 gigs of RAM. Here we go, M4 large, this looks pretty good. Great, I'm gonna stay with Amazon Linux and I'm gonna say next step, create. This should take just a second or so. We get a nice positive message. And so this first step here, why it's so important is that this is where we're gonna be able to create our index.html file that we'll use later when we develop our website. So while that's spinning up, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Route 53, which is a service that allows you to purchase and manage domain names. So what we're going to do is we're going to find a domain name here. I'm going to find something called some kind of a name. So we'll say Big Blue Website. Does that work? Is that available? And it is. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and purchase that. Add to cart. Go through here. Boy, isn't shopping fun. We'll go through and put all this information in here. Great. Okay, now I'm going to continue and I'm going to purchase this website. We can even say private if we want here. And then we'll continue. I'll read these terms of services and I'll complete the order. Great. This should be pretty quick here. Big Blue Website. Pending requests, and now I'm actually going through and I'm purchasing this website. So that's really the gist of how you purchase a website. Pretty straightforward. So because I've already purchased websites in the past, I can skip on to the next step here. We can come back to that one later if we want to, but I'm going to go to S3 now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a website inside of here. And now one of the things that we'll have to do is we'll have to find some hosted domain that's available. I've already purchased one, which is this one right here. So I'm going to go to this domain and I'm going to look for a name here. In this case, this is build MC Intel. And what I can do here is I can look at this URL, or I can create a new one. Let's go ahead and create a new one. We'll call this Cloud9 because we really like Cloud9. We'll call it Cloud9 web, and this will be a subdomain. And for now, I can just leave this to a default if I wanted to, or I can set it to an alias. And then this alias will be the bucket that I create. So I'm going to go back here to S3, and I'm going to create this bucket. And so we'll say Cloud9, and we got to match the same thing that appears here. So it'll be mcintel.com. And then all I do next here is I just leave everything default and I take off block all public access because we do want to create a public access website. There we go. We create a bucket. Now that that bucket's created, you can sort by created and you can see this should be available here. Now that that's been created, if I go back to Route 53 here and I say alias, inside of here, this will eventually populate with that exact name. So that's really the trick here, is that you take this name here and then you populate it. Now, one thing I'll have to do first though, is I'll need to go to properties and I will set up static website hosting. So let's go to static website hosting and we'll say use this bucket to host a domain. Yes. And we'll create a file called index.html. There we go. And that is pretty much all I need to do, with the exception of now creating that index.html file. So I'm going to use my Cloud9 environment here to do that. So I'm going to create a file called touch. I'm going to use touch.index.html. which will create an empty file. And now I'll open this up and I'll put in some HTML. And HTML is pretty easy to learn. You can just Google how to write a HTML file. In this case, we'll start with a tag, an opening tag, and then it closes it for us. That's one nice thing about Cloud9. We'll create, again, another tag here. Again, it closes it for us, and we'll say, this is my S3 website. And that's it. We've created a successful website here with just this file, and now I can right-click, and I can download this file locally. There we go. It downloaded it locally. Now, because I previously had another file there, what I'll need to do is clear out those other files here. So let's go ahead and download this again. So this can happen sometimes if you have already downloaded a file. So let's download it one more time. Make sure we have the right name. Okay, great. So it's called index.html. So now I can go to this bucket, and inside of here I can upload that file. We'll say upload, and that index file will get uploaded there. And now what I can do is I also can manage these public permissions here if I want to. And we can say grant public read to this object. And we do want that because we have a public website. There we go. Let's upload that. And now if I go back to my properties here, we can test out that this website is actually working. We can go to static website, and what this will do, if we click on it, there we go. You can see that we already have a public website working. So this is really jobs finished. And if you used a technology like Hugo, you would immediately put it on there. Now, to make it a little nicer though, we want to hook this up to a domain name. So we can go back to Route 53, and let's use, if you remember, we had this particular name, and this particular name is called Cloud9 Web MC Intel. So what I will do is I will need to go back to Route 53, and we'll create a record set called Cloud9 Web, like that. And I'll leave it at an A record, and I'll select alias. And with alias, what'll happen is I can go ahead and pick one of these targets here, and one of these targets will show up, and then that will link it up to a publicly hosted website. It takes a little bit for this to actually respond and get everything working, but if we wanted to go and make a neater name, we could go ahead and do that. So that's how you do that. So that's website one. Now let's move on to website two. So we'll again go into this development environment, and what we're going to do is we're going to build a lambda function. So I'm going to go here to local functions. I'm going to click this button, create a new lambda function. And for this, we'll call this cloud lambda web, like that. And we can go through this wizard. We can select the Python 3.6 runtime, empty Python function. And for a function trigger, this is an important part to create a website, is we're going to select an API gateway. And from this section, we'll put that we want this API gateway to serve things out at the root. So we're going to create this static website here. This website that serves out resources at the root. And this will have to be dynamic. So every time we call this function, it'll serve out HTML. We'll say no security because it's just a simple website, and we'll go ahead and say next. And then we finish this, and now we have a environment that's set up for us with this local function. Now, what I'm going to do next here, because we're going to need to run this lambda function, is I've already created some code in GitHub. So I'm going to go to GitHub, and I have a cloud repository here, Cloud Practitioner, and I'm going to go grab some code. Here we go. And this is really a very simple amount of code here. Let's look at it right here, and let's paste this in. So you could do the same thing on your own. Let's go to this environment, paste this in, and let's walk through how simple this code really is. So all lambda functions need to have a lambda handler. And what we're doing is we're creating a variable called content. This content has an HTML tag here, just like we did in the previous example. And then there's another variable, and this is the tricky part, is we take that variable and we put it inside of this other variable, inside of this dictionary. And then we specify that the content type will be HTML, and that's it. That's all we need to do. So next I'm going to save this. And now let's go ahead and test this out. So with this Cloud9 environment, I can right click and I can say run, and I can say run in API Gateway local. So test it out like I would be testing it if I deployed it. We'll go ahead and run this, and we should get back a response that shows us that this thing is running. Okay, looks like there's something going on here, but we know that this works, so we can go ahead and do a deploy. So while that's deploying, I can now go over to our Cloud9 environment here. So let's go to Lambda. And from here, we should be able to see that, that Cloud Lambda environment. Here we go, here it is. And you can see that an API gateway has already been set up for us. So that's one of the great things about this Cloud9 workflow. And if we look at the code, look, it looks exactly like what we'd expect. I can even test this out locally if I want to. So I can create a test function here. In this case, we'll just make it do nothing, right? And we'll just say nothing. And because all it's going to do is return back some HTML. We test it. And if we look at the response here, look, it looks like it's working correctly. Great. Now, how do I test this out further? Well, I can click on this API gateway here, and it will show me this endpoint. And now if I click on this endpoint, there we go. So now we have a second website that we created. And again, it was just a very little bit of code. And now we have a second version. Okay, can we do better? Can we create a third website? Let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do next here is we're going to go to the cloud EC2 environment, and this will spin up a physical server. And so when this physical server environment, what we'll do is we will go to spot requests, and we will request a spot instance. And we can leave the defaults here. Again, we'll pick Amazon Linux. And so there's a couple tricks here that we need to be careful of. So one of them is that in order to edit this, this is very important. If you don't put a key pair in here, we won't be able to connect to this machine. So let's go ahead and create a new key pair. Whenever I'm doing a demo, a throwaway, something, I just create one with the date. So I'm going to say demo November 5th. That's the date today when I created this video. Great. And that'll download it local. And now what I'll do is I'll go to Cloud9, and I will go to this upload local file section. And this will allow me to select that demo file and put it inside of this environment. So now I can use this as a kicking off point, basically. So this is really powerful functionality that we can leverage from our Cloud9 development environment. Next, what I'll do is I'll refresh this, and I'll make sure that I have demo November 5th here. And that looks like it's pretty close. There's one more gotcha that we have to be very careful of. And again, it's available in this additional configuration. And the gotcha is we're going to build a web service. And so that means that we're going to need to create a security group that exposes port 80. And we're also going to need to SSH. So we're going to need to export, we're going to need to expose port 22. So let's create this new security group. And from here, we'll make sure we have a descriptive name. So we'll call this demo web server, and we'll put today's date because we know this is going to be deleted later. And then we can describe it. We say this is a demo security group that exposes port 80 and port 22. Okay, and now we need to add those two rules. So first rule, let's go through here. Fortunately, it's already set up for us, SSH. And it exposes port 22, and then we'll say anywhere, right? And so anybody can connect to port 22. They have to have the key that I set up, so it's very secure still. And then also we can set up HTTP, and this will expose port 80, and again, we'll say anywhere. So now that I've got those two ports set up, we're ready to go here. And so now I can go back again, and I can refresh this list, and we should see demo web server. We need to click that so we can have port 22 and port 80 exposed. And that should be all we need. We can leave the default here at 1. And you can see it's gonna pick one of these 3 servers here to spin up. Let's go ahead and say launch. Once we go to launch, it'll bring us back to the console, and this would take usually just a few seconds to submit the request. It'll pick one of those. Keep refreshing here. Oh, it's green, great. It's probably already launching. And now another great first step here is make sure that you name this spot instance. So we can call it spot, right? So we know that we can get rid of it later, and then maybe put today's date, again, November 5th, and then we'll say web server demo. Always a good idea to put these patterns in place when you're demoing things. So one of the first things that we're going to need to do is connect to this machine, but we can kind of think ahead a little bit and know that we're going to need to build to build a connection to it via SSH. And so what I can do is, if I leave this selected here, I can click connect, and then it gives me the instructions of how I need to connect to this. So good thing we downloaded that key. So I'm going to go and select that copy, go back to Cloud9, and look, that's inside of my current working directory. I can say chmod 400. So this sets the permissions so that the SSH protocol can use it. So this is something about SSH, is it's an encrypted connection to a machine that you can control. And so they're very particular about the types of permissions. And so in this case, we want to select it to be chmod 400. Next, we can double click this and copy this SSH, and this will SSH into this machine as long as the machine is fully initialized. So this is what happens sometimes, is it will take a little bit of time, and we can click here and make sure that this server is still spinning up here, but let's go ahead and try to connect anyway. So we'll paste that command in. It looks like we are able to connect. Great. And then the first thing I typically do is I just do an update, right? It's always a good idea. Let's go ahead and do sudo yum update. And this installs the latest versions of all the packages. It's a pretty powerful machine. It should be really quick. And now we're pretty close to being ready here to set up this website. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install the web service. And so this is going to install Apache. After I do these updates, I'm going to install the Apache web service. And looks like it's pretty close to being completed. All right, so I typically make a little space here so I can see everything. This should take just a second. And then now that looks like it's finished, I'm going to go ahead and run this command, sudo yum y, and this says don't prompt me, install httpd. So basically install Apache. We'll go ahead and do that. It should be really quick. Okay, great. Apache's installed. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start Apache. And so I'm going to run a command called sudo service httpd start. So you can see this is a lot more complicated than either S3 or Lambda. And this is, again, the old way of doing websites. And now all I got to do is I can say sudo su hyphen. This says become the root user. And now I'm going to cd into var www. And let's see what's inside of here. There's a file called HTML. So if I put a file inside of here, this will now create a website. So I'm going to do something very similar. I'm going to use a command called vim. And this is a really important command for people that are using the cloud, is to know how to use a text-based editor. So the way you use it is you type in the word vim and then the name of the file. To edit, you put the I key. Once you're in insert mode, now I can just paste in some commands. So I'm going to put in HTML right here. So this is a lot more work than doing this yourself with Cloud9, but we'll do a paragraph tag, and then we'll say this is EC2 website, and then I'll do a closing p tag like this, and then I'll do a closing HTML tag, so /HTML, and that's it. And now to save this is always something that trips you up with the Vim editor, is I'm going to hold the escape key down. That gets me out of insert mode. Then I do colon, so it's shift colon, and then I do WQ. This means right quit. And now I've changed that file. There's only one more thing I need to do. And I'm going to say chmod 755. So this says, let everybody read this file. Now, once I do this, how am I going to know how am I going to know how to access this web server? Fortunately, very easy with EC2. So I can go to connect again and look at the name. Here we go. Connect to your instance using public DNS. There we go. And we can connect to this. And if I go and I put this into a web browser, there you go. This is an EC2 website. So you can see how we developed very quickly 3 different websites completely from scratch: S3, Lambda, and also EC2. And so what I would recommend next is make sure that you go through and you understand how to do all these ones on your own and build these websites by practicing these techniques.